Introducing the new DigiCert. As the leading provider of high-assurance SSL, TLS, and PKI certificates, DigiCert is all about improving security across the web and IoT. DigiCert is committed to helping customers and partners successfully deploy identity, authentication, and encryption solutions. They'll even help you figure out which certificate you need to secure your web domains, apps, devices, and more. Check out the Cert Wizard tool under the SSL tab on digicert.com. The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network. Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. This segment is titled Penetration Testing is Dead. Long live penetration testing. Before we get into it, visit itpro.tv/Security Weekly. Use the code SECWeekly30. Try it free for 7 days, or buy a subscription for your entire organization so that all of your employees get access to over 3,300 hours of IT and security training. Again, visit them, itpro.tv/Security Weekly. Adrian Sanabria. Adrian Sanabria.
You didn't fucking listen.
Like, once it gets in my
Sanabria,
my head. Not Kevin is here, as well as Jason Wood. See, I like Jason because his name's really easy. It's Jason Wood. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah,
it's going
Wood is pretty
good.
vanilla.
Yes. So, Adrian, I want to start by asking you, why do we need to reconsider penetration testing?
Yeah. So. Yeah, a lot of reasons. Honestly, the idea for this talk came from just talking to, from pen testing myself, from talking to other pen testers I'm still friends with who are still doing it, and hearing the same things over and over and over the years. And I actually start off my talk by telling a story about a hospital for children, you know, that we used to do penetration tests on. And I go in this talk year after year after year. You know, year one, it's a lot of fun. You know, pen testing is, you know, when you have a lot of success. You know, not when it's too easy, but you know, you get into something. You know, it's that just a classic puzzle challenge. You know, why pen testers love what they do. But you go into the same place year two and nothing's fixed, and year three and nothing's fixed, and you know, maybe your nephew or your kid, you know is at that children's hospital, and and shit gets real all of a sudden, and you start thinking, you know, is it what we're doing? Are they just assholes? Is the problem us? Is the problem them? You know, what's going on here? So when I founded Savage Security, along with Kyle Bob, my co-founder and friend, one of the things we wanted to do was to kind of rethink a lot of things in security. One of them being consulting. You know, if we took a pen testing engagement and just broke it down into its components, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Why aren't people getting better?
I think that's one of the major frustrations today. That I think we have with pen testers, that likely customers of pen testers, of penetration tests have, is how do we get to fixing all of the results? That's a reoccurring theme, Adrian, that I've heard as well, that organizations aren't acting upon and implementing the remediation that penetration testers are recommending. Larry, I'm sure you could speak to this.
I will also expound on that, is that when we deliver a report, they go and fix all the things that you recommended, but because you were given a limited scope or a limited time frame in which to conduct the test, that you couldn't find everything. So the next year you go back in, you go, oh, you test for all the same things you tested for before, but they fixed all those, but oh, this other low-hanging fruit is still over here, and you wipe the floor with them all over again. You go to do that a third year with another low-hanging fruit, and it's just You're never given enough time.
So even if they act upon your results, you're still having success the next year.
Yes.
Yeah, that's problematic.
So you're touching on one of the the big problems that we found, which was that pen testing is really just looking at a point in time and reporting on a point in time state of the client. And the solution there is to focus more on the root cause issues.
Yes.
Why are there any vulnerabilities at all? Why do these devices have default creds? And to do that, you have to do some interviews. You have to understand how the business works. What's dysfunctional that, no matter when you come in, maybe they're fixing the stuff you point out, but new stuff pops up. Why is that happening? And how can we break this cycle where, clearly some root cause issue is there, that there's always something to find when you come back in. Because really what's happening here is they're using you in a very dysfunctional way as part of their vulnerability management program. And if they have to depend on you to find, the missing vulnerabilities, and you're only coming in once a year, then that's very dysfunctional, because what's the how long is that pen test report good for until new vulnerabilities start being discovered and popping up? A couple of weeks, maybe a month or two. So you've got this huge gap when you're not having a pen test, and you miss that stuff for the entire rest of the year. So we need to find the root cause here, and I think one of the keys, Larry, you touched on, that we found is people need help with the fixing itself. Telling them what's wrong just is not enough for a lot of companies. Either they don't have the staff or the understanding or the skills, or in a lot of cases, maybe it's a political type thing, where somebody needs to be more scared, or, prioritize it more. And I hate to see pen tests used that way, like organizations where the primary purpose of the pen test is to create fear in management.
I think from Enguardian's side that we do create that fear in management. But as part of our recommendations coming out of that is that we're there on site. We've spoken with the customer a number of times. We understand their business. We try to understand what some of the issues that they're facing. Whether it be staffing or technologically and those types of things. So not only when we have a finding, it very much addresses how you can fix that individual finding, but how you can fix the root cause problems to prevent some of this stuff from going onward in the future. So it's very much an organizational type of change. Some organizations do really well in those organizational changes, and we still find issues. Others don't. They just fix, well, we needed to do input filtering. Well, great, we'll just do input filtering on that one field. Yeah.
So the way we handle that, and I like to say, talking about scaring management with it, whatever, I call that publicly I call that the aha moment. That's a nice way of saying it. It's the oh shit moment. That moment where you show management something, that makes them say, oh shit, we got to do something about this. We've got to fix this. Unfortunately, with some businesses, it takes a breach happening, or maybe two breaches, or maybe three. But hopefully you can do it with a pen test. And what we found is we try and force that moment to happen sooner, because typically with a pen test, that happens after you hand off the penetration test report, and you're done with the client at that point. Like, maybe they can come back and ask questions and stuff. But, I felt it was important to move that as close to the front of the engagement as possible. So in order to do that, we tried to make the penetration test more efficient, and we analyzed, okay, what are the steps of the penetration test? And there's two big chunks of wasted time that we found there. You've got the scan at the beginning of the penetration test. A lot of times the analyst is waiting on a scan. They can still be doing stuff while a scan is running, but still waiting for scans to finish is going to slow you down, right? So what we do is we can give clients a link to a VM that they can download that'll run the scan before the pen tester even starts, maybe a week before or days before or whatever. Or we can ship them a box on site that they can plug in, and that'll scan the environment. But the point being, using some automation here, and just some slight change to logistics, we can have a lot of automated scanning and discovery and stuff like that finished before we start throwing a $300 an hour, $250 an hour, $350 an hour analyst into the mix. On the back end is reporting, and I've seen many cases where you can automate a lot of that, take that big chunk out. Once you've done that, and this is one of the things we realize is that very little time in the pen test is actually spent entirely focused on pen testing. So not only can you be more focused on what you want to spend time on in the first place, the pen testing, it's not going to take you as long. And we've got some other strategies there where we use sampling. We're not going to pen test and scan every single subnet, every single IP. If you've got systemic issues, you don't have to hit every subnet to see that. If you hit 3 subnets and 10% of the computers are missing AV, I don't need to see your other 6 subnets. That's an issue. That's a finding. And then we can dedicate more of the engagement to just helping them fix things. We also do some breach and attack simulation, where maybe you're using simulated ransomware, with a worm component. See what happens when you release it in the environment. Simulating command and control. So basically, you're testing their ability to detect and respond to stuff, as well as just that surface level preventative stuff. Are you missing patches? Do you have default creds? Those sorts of things.
So it's like it sounds like the second that last half there is very much a purple team type of offense. Offense informs defense.
A lot of similarity.
Yep, offense informs defense type of thing, and vice versa.
So, Adrian, I have a question, if you don't mind, because it sounds like framing this conversation, a lot of the challenges you've been describing are about, the scope is wrong, or the organization chooses the wrong type of testing mentality. How did you get organizations to start shifting more towards, as Larry described, more of a purple team mentality, something that's more dynamic as you're doing the engagement? You find something and you act on that rather than just saying, I'll write it up and let's hope they fix it later.
Honestly, most of the companies we've been doing this for, and this is one of the points I have to make, is, when I've thrown this idea out there and gotten into conversations and found a lot of disparity between my ideas and the other person's ideas, I asked them what they did. And usually they're doing serious red teaming stuff, large, mature organization, big banks, financial institutions, stuff like that. We've mostly been working with organizations that if they have a security guy, it's one. So they don't have any preconceived notions or expectations. They haven't been doing it a different way for a while. Like a lot of times we're the first person coming in doing any kind of pen test or offensive security engagement for them. Or they've had so few that they're really, really open to trying whatever. They're trusting us to do the right thing for them.
So would you say one of the major challenges is that the expectation of a pen test means it's a box concept, and that you have an engagement, you get a report, and then the vendor comes back next year and does it again. And by working with smaller organizations, you're finding you don't have that preconceived notion, which actually allows you to provide more value to the engagement. Would that be a fair assessment?
It would, and you touched on something very important there, that we do have to satisfy that for any replacement to work, for me to pitch a replacement and to have any chance of success, we still have to check that box. If they have to do PCI or they have some kind of regulation that requires a pen test, we still have to satisfy that requirement. But basically I'm saying, hey, we can, by being more efficient here, we can do a whole lot of other stuff as well.
You're going to add so much more value to the engagement than just the pen test, and help them so much more. That's the kind of thing is that, many times you find a customer that has no idea what they actually want. They say they want a pen test, but they have no idea what the heck a pen test actually is. So an opportunity to steer them in the right direction, down the right path of what a pen test can be, and give them so much more value for what they're spending.
And so there is a challenge. One of the challenges there is, you do need someone with the pen tester, whoever's doing this, unless you're using multiple people with different skill sets, does have to have kind of that blue team mentality, does have to have a slightly different skill set to be able to do some of this. And I think we can document and train, and that's not that huge a challenge, but to do it tomorrow with very offensive mindset existing penetration testers might be a bit of a challenge.
My thoughts on this issue, and I want to put this out there for the panel, are that in your findings for a penetration test, however you're conducting that assessment, I think that it's not just an assessment of maybe what patches are missing or configuration or vulnerabilities that might exist. I think it's more of an assessment of how IT operations are conducted in that organization. In other words, if I were to do pen testing today, I think that my primary finding in many organizations would be the inability to push out new software, new systems, new patches into your environment, and do that on a daily, a multiple times a day basis. And if you're not able to do that, then you're instantly...
Wait, continuous patching.
Continuous patching, right? They used Adrian's term before. But if you lack the ability in any of your various departments or systems to be able to push out new software, new applications, or new configuration, like instantly in my pen test, you fail, just right off the bat. And I think that's one of the systemic problems we have with pen testing is we're pointing out individual things when really the problem is not so much you're missing a patch there or you've got a weak password over there. It's what's your ability to push out new controls or new software, new abilities into your environment. If you're not able to do that, if you've got legacy systems or you've got applications that the developers can only push out a new release every 6 months, or you've got patches from Microsoft and in a lot of your departments, they can't handle new patches and it takes us 3 months to test those, to me, that's the failure. That's the failure in every single environment today is why can't you as an organization have the ability to push things out multiple times?
So what you're saying is they're not nearly agile enough.
It's more DevOps than it is agile, but I think when you read the Phoenix Project, and I think one of my disappointments on the Phoenix Project is it didn't so much talk about software as much as it talked about IT operations. However, the flip side of that was I learned so much more about a lot of things we've talked about in the show for the past 14 years, that the real problem is being really good at IT operations. Now, you also have to be really good if you're making your own software and pushing it out, but it's a similar kind of problem, and I feel like that's the downfall in so many organizations, why they'll have so many findings in a pen testing report. It's not because they have so many systems that are vulnerable, it's that their processes to push out new software to fix those issues are non-existent, or there's so many barriers to that they can't effectively change things in their environment on a very regular or continuous manner.
So they need to be continuously agile.
Yes. Adrian,
sorry,
Jason,
Adrian.
Kevin.
You've nailed it, Paul. And I like to say that patching is not a defensive control. This is not something you can use to defend yourself because you don't know when you're going to get the patch. You don't know if you're going to find out about it in time. It's not even a security. It should not be a security role. Right. To manage that. That is an IT operations role. And you need to have some kind of plan when the patch is not available, when it doesn't get installed in time, and you're exposed and there's workable exploits out there being actively used. So, I like to say, design your systems and manage your systems as if there's always a 0 day and the patch is never coming.
And I think there's an aspect of resiliency. And in fact, I've started a plan here, at Security Weekly along those lines. And it's very much based on the experiences with Netflix and Amazon, where I think a lot of their engineers, specifically with Amazon, I was just telling our operations staff this earlier, that one of the lead engineers at Amazon that helped build their cloud infrastructure would do exercises and say, you know what, today and for the foreseeable future, this data center is no longer available, and would take it down. And at one point, there was 100 engineers that were begging that person to bring that back online. Like, you got to end the exercise. And he was like, no, this data center literally burned to the ground. And if we put that in the context of security, it perfectly overlaps, right? Like, there is a vulnerability and you must push out a new patch. And if it breaks something, you got to figure that out, or have structured your IT operations and your architecture such that it doesn't matter if that's burnt to the ground, if a patch has killed that, if a software update has killed that, if a configuration has killed that. you've got to move forward. And in Amazon and Netflix, of course, have this problem at scale that Netflix has to be able to stream movies. Amazon has to have infrastructure for their customers. But that's how they've learned over time to be more resilient. And I think resiliency really breeds good, not only uptime, but also security as well.
And there's two big components there. There's testing and process improvement, and we're not good at either. So we're just now starting to see, one market I'm excited about is the breach and attack simulation market.
Sure.
Where we now have, just the concept of it, not even any commercial tools or open source tools, but the concept that, hey, we put this box in a rack, it's supposed to do X, Y, and Z. Let's test it and see if it works. And it's amazing. Again, this is another one of those, why just now in 2018 are we coming to this conclusion? I'm sure other people have figured this out. But as an industry, we're just kind of coming to this realization that, hey, our MSSP threw a box in a rack and supposedly they're monitoring it. Let's maybe see if they notice bad stuff, if we simulate bad stuff, because the idea is they're going to give us a call, right?
Well, and I think it's the difference between the Netflix Chaos Monkey, which literally was shutting off VMs, and the concept of what we call here, and a lot of other people do as well, the QA bot is testing functionality. So you not only need continuous processes that are testing functionality to make sure that after you've made a change, is everything working, and finding out about that as soon as possible, but not just finding out about it, relaying that information to the people that can fix it, not after days or weeks, but within hours or minutes. And then it's also purposely causing failures within your environment and seeing how resilient your infrastructure. And those are two different activities that I think are extremely difficult to get implemented if you're not creating a brand new organization today from scratch. And I think that's why we've got a penetration testing market today, is because there are established companies and organizations today that have a really tough time implementing all of that because they've got so much legacy infrastructure, a legacy culture that is not on board with, there is going to be 10 new changes pushed down on systems today, and there are going to be outages that happen today that we have to make sure we're resilient against, that we are putting in place. I think if we take those two things, your penetration test becomes super valuable, because now you're just, I've done all this stuff, but you're telling me about the stuff I really don't know about. And even if I did threat modeling, I still didn't consider, because you're a third party evaluating that. So I will kind of, my one thing in this conversation where I actually lean on the side of pen testing is it will find those really bizarre, weird scenarios, those things you didn't consider. I believe even if you've got a DevOps environment, even if you're doing IT operations and you're purposely taking stuff down, you're super resilient, there are going to be those situations where stuff's just gonna, go wrong because someone was thinking outside the box. But overall, I think we can improve our security posture and our uptime by doing those lessons we've learned from DevOps and implementing that in our IT operations.
So you touched on two things that I hit on in my talk a lot, which is resiliency, and I talk about maturity, and being able to test things like that destructively. Like you're talking about AWS and Netflix and Simian Army and Chaos Monkey and all these things. The benefit you get from that is process improvement. The more you break things, the more you mature. The more you get this cycle of process improvement where you try all the things that could go wrong, and you gain experience from that. You gain maturity. So the question was, how do we get that from a consulting engagement? How do we break things on purpose in security without losing our jobs, without getting fired, without waiting for actual attacks to hit us? Right. Which is a terrible time, to try and learn anything. What's the one stage of incident response that always gets skipped?
Jason, you had some comments. Sorry.
With penetration testing, one of the things that I have found to be really useful when I was doing that as a consultant with clients is using this as an opportunity to get the IT operations working in an environment that they're not comfortable with when you're pairing up. And it's kind of that purple teaming type of thing. But use it as a training opportunity. I would be doing penetration tests and be sitting there talking to the client, and I would have no problem with stopping for a little while to train them on something or other that we saw, or that, the question that they had, and use that as a way of introducing them to new ideas, getting them to train them on tools that they should have, or that they had rather, but they didn't know how to use. And getting them used to working under fire. If you set things up right. For example, we did an engagement one time when I was at Secure Ideas. One that I stuck out in my mind is we had a few of us sitting in the room doing testing, a couple of their people watching and learning off of us. The defenders were outside, knew we were there, but had no idea what we were doing. And we had one guy running back and forth. We hit the end of that week, and we tore up stuff and whatnot. But the guy who was running back and forth said, "Hey, this was really interesting because we see where you were on the network, what you were doing, and then when you disappeared." And all of a sudden, this was like a big aha moment to them, because they saw where they thought they had pretty good defenses, good monitoring, and yet we would disappear from their site. And so that chatter and that conversation that was happening back and forth was extremely useful in that. James Jardine, another guy I was working with on this engagement, he and I made the comment that, hey, this was a good couple weeks worth of work. We really did something there that affected that client.
Well, so what I like about you,
and how we structure that.
Yeah, and what I like about what you said, Jason, was that the pen test as a positive can introduce and almost be the chaos monkey at that point in time, and get the culture and the organization used to that adverse things are going to happen, that conditions are going to happen, and if we're not prepared for them, like while it's happening, we need to do a lessons learned and figure out how we can be more resilient, so the next time we have that pen test, it's not a big deal. Now, in terms of resiliency, now the flip side of that is, at what point do we not detect their behavior?
I'm trying to find a way to combine continuous, agile, and resilient in the same sentence, and I can't.
You've got a new product and a new vendor that you could create.
The problem is it won't fit in any category, so
a continuous, agile, resilient test.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So Jason, that's I mean, what you're hitting on there is you guys naturally stumbled into what I think a lot of us have naturally stumbled into, is that and this occurred to me back when I was originally pen testing for the first time. I'd be doing stuff and thinking, man, this should be really visible. They should know I'm using WMI to turn AV off on all their stuff, and then I mess with it, and then I turn AV back on. And it's just, mind blowing. And I think most pen testers have had this experience. They're like, wow, I got away with that, and no one noticed. So, it's kind of
Adrian, that's
come to the conclusion. Why don't we just set it up where, that's the goal, for them to see us and train them, use that to train.
And not only that, but be able to sustain some type of anomaly on the network. I'll never forget the times many, many, many years ago where someone came to me and said, hey, I want you to do a penetration test on a nuclear power plant. And by the way, they've never had a test. By the way, the system that you're going to be testing runs the power for 4 different states. And, we want you to just, tread lightly. And fast forward to today, when I think about that, and I didn't accept that pen test because I was like, no, they're not prepared for any kind of resiliency. And I don't have enough insurance to cover my butt on this test. Sorry. But when you fast forward to today, in all those years I spent in vulnerability management too, if your systems and your applications cannot withstand an automated scanning tool like Adrian and I were talking about in the early 2000s, we'd run scans, or any kind of vulnerability test, that's a huge finding in and of itself, regardless of what you crash or what vulnerabilities you find. If your level of resiliency isn't that we can run off-the-shelf, free, open source, or commercial tools and can't run them against your systems because they're just going to cause problems, that in and of itself is a finding that you need to get to the point where automated processes can run and test stuff and either be resilient so that they don't crash, or if it does crash, it's not a big deal because you've made your architecture such that it doesn't matter.
It's resilient.
And that's what I feel should really be like the goal before you have a pen test, is to do a lot of this testing internally and make sure you're resilient enough. Like, to me, those tests were the least interesting because the major finding wasn't, I'm going to find some zero-day exploit or even some existing exploit. It was that your processes aren't in line to be able to be resilient enough to hit the standard of what tools are going to be running against your network. Like, to me, that was sad.
And to me, the replacement for the pen test is exactly what you're describing. You know, is this interactive, dynamic thing where you come in and you're ready to do whatever. You know, maybe you come in, you find they're super mature. Okay, we're just going to do a full-on pen test, red team, whatever. And logistically, you know, maybe it's not as simple as I'm describing, but, you know, you come in and like, you know, you can't even run a scan without stuff breaking. You know, that's your starting point. But
Right.
whatever the case, you know, they're probably going to need your help with something. So we need to be flexible enough to say, okay, you know, this is no longer this type of engagement. We're going to step it down a level and maybe look at low-hanging fruit, look at basic hardening stuff that you might need to take care of here.
Sure. Jason, Kevin, Larry, questions for Adrian along these lines. You know,
Adrian,
Kevin?
I have you know, thinking about this and trying to break out of this cycle of what a pen test could be. You know, the scope has been limited. The time is too restrictive, and we end up with this report, and this report's never acted upon for all the reasons we've been talking about so far. For our listeners, you know, looking to get, say, this new way of looking at what an engagement can be, less strictly offensive and more dynamic, learning, building together, how do you get management buy-in? Because generally what I hear is the scope is limited because of management. So how do you go up the chain? What would be your recommendation to start saying, well, let's approach this from a different way?
So the big change is we're actually leaning more on the breach and attack simulations to get to that aha moment than the pen testing stuff. You know, because it, you know, when you can simulate a breach that they've seen in the papers, you simulate different events and different things that we know occurred in known breaches to companies that are similar to the one that you're talking to and working with. I think it makes things more real than hey, you're missing a patch and it could be exploited. So that we found more success getting that aha moment from doing these simulations where you assume some level of intrusion has already occurred, which we know eventually some piece of malware, ransomware, targeted attack is going to get past that first level of defenses. They're going to get that foot in the door, and we've just had a lot more success with, okay, here's what happens when somebody has a foot in the door, you know, and boom, run a whole bunch of automated simulations in a very short amount of time. We even played around with the idea of selling this, doing this as a loss leader, doing this for free, saying, hey, we're just going to come in, do some breach simulations, give you the report, you know, just so you know how you would do if you know, your worst day, you know, in an IT sense happened today.
Yeah, and you know, I think a lot of the recommendations certainly that we'll make today as pen testers require a lot of changes in our environment, and I think some of those can be as easy as, well, it's a patch, and sometimes that's not so easy, right? Other changes require more of like, this problem is just inherent to Active Directory, as we've talked about, and you need to re-architect the way you've implemented Active Directory, or that even reaches a limit where you're like, you basically now need to monitor. Once you've kind of tried to fix all the stuff in Active Directory that you can, now you need to monitor to make sure that if these particular events are happening, you need to do that. So does it all come down to that we need continuous monitoring, that we need a SIM, that we need monitoring? Or like, how does that shape up to implement your defenses such that you could detect pen testers, you could detect attackers and stop them and limit the scope of the breach? Is it patching? Is it configuration? Is it monitoring? And what level do we need to be at in all those areas?
Yeah, so I just see that as a series of filters. Like if you look at some of these fancy water filters that have, different materials or different techniques they use to, get maybe large things filtered out, smaller things, bacteria, whatever. I think it's similar to that. It's being cost conscious, whatever your budget can afford. With preventative controls, you filter out as much as you can, you patch as well as you can. But knowing you're never going to hit 100% with that, you need another filter. You need another layer there. And it's the basic layered defense idea here. But, I feel like often when we say that, a lot of people think of that as, oh, yeah, I've got a bunch of different controls. But literally, you're looking at the same event, the same you got to look at it more like a kill chain where, you're going to stop the attacker at the next level. And one of the examples I give is Equifax. Everybody talks about, Equifax, lost 100 and however many million credit reports because of struts, because they didn't patch struts too. And, I make this point, I've got a slide that makes a point that no, yes, that got the foot in the door, but there are all these other things where, if you're monitoring, you could detect it. Maybe something automated stops the attacker at that level. Maybe it's a SOC analyst or, somebody pushing a switch. But there's tons of other opportunities to stop that 140, 150 million credit reports from going out the door, from getting exfiltrated.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point. So just to be clear, we're not saying that pen testing is dead, correct? We're really talking...
Pen testing as an engagement, I'm saying we need to kill. Like, I'm saying pen testing should be a task, should be a portion of the engagement as a skill that we use as just part of the process.
Mm. And so, Adrian, what are the other components that you would build into a consulting engagement that would include penetration testing? Like, what else should customers that are looking for a pen test, what should they be commanding to make this a much more value-based exercise?
I think they need more actionable advice on what they actually do to fix stuff, including, like, we'll sit there behind them as they log into their next-gen firewall, their IPS, whatever, and we'll work through the configuration with them. If they need scripts written, if they need, if you do have to re-architect AD, okay, here's how you would do it. And so our goal was to get as much of the exercise that you use to identify the problems done upfront and quickly. Mm-hmm. And we sit in a conference room. We try and do that sitting in a conference room, hooked up to a projector. They're sitting there looking at their phones, waiting to get alerts, alarms, whatever, from their MSSP, from their systems. And we try and do as much as that as we can with them sitting there, so we can have a conversation. I say, okay, here's what I'm doing. Here's what your system should be doing in response. And once we discover that stuff, and we feel like we have enough, okay, this is enough for us to work on for the next 6 months, or 3 months, or a year, or whatever your goal is. We stop that part of the engagement where we're discovering issues, and we prioritize what we found, and we just start working on stuff. So, to me, I think that's the key and that's what I'm seeing is part of the engagement needs to have some aspect of hand-holding, of actively helping you redesign things or fix things or make improvements.
And Adrian, do you also, Joe McRae actually came on, I think, almost 2 years ago, and had started changing the way he does engagements. And I think that the phrase penetration testing is not really akin to what we're doing today, from what you described and from what Joe described. And Joe brought up an interesting point. He said, after assessing, in the way you described, Adrian, the security posture of an organization, he's like, one of the things I would do was spend time and help them find the right vendor to fix their problems and be on the vendor call with them. Is that something that you think we should also kind of delve into to help organizations today?
Absolutely. Yeah, because oftentimes wherever they're getting stuck, and a lot of them are going to get stuck at that point. But yeah, to what you're saying, the penetration, the vulnerability scan results, generally as pen testers, and this is something that's not well captured, we can look at vulnerability scan output and tell you, yeah, I can use that. I know from experience that I can get in with that. I can exploit that, but I can't with this. This is probably a false positive.
This high really
the rest of this is all bullshit.
Yeah, this high really isn't a high, but these 4 lows together, oh goddamn.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. So the thing is, we don't have to actually, those of us that are experienced, and the frustration is this knowledge doesn't go anywhere. It's in our heads. It doesn't go back into the vulnerability management product. So this is something I was trying to get the vulnerability management industry to do, is to kind of crowdsource maybe likelihood or quality or some kind of metric, on 148 other penetration testers found this exploit useful.
Found this vulnerability finding.
But that's a very profound statement, Adrian. In talking with Larry and John Strand at Black Hills, they will tell you that they've got filters, and they've got, even in their brands, like you said, if I see these not so much critical, but like you said, Larry, I see these 4 low.
Informational.
Yeah, and I know from experience that those things combined, I'm in, and they go do it, right? And what Adrian is saying, can we take that knowledge and disseminate it out to the customers and say, well, if you've got this kind of combination of these things, then here's how you go fix that.
Yeah,
I think that's really awesome.
It's part of the quote kill chain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but my point is kind of we shouldn't have to do a whole lot of penetration to make the client better. A lot of that ends up being wasted time, ends up being us as pen testers challenging ourselves,
right?
Wanting to see how far we can go, but it's not really adding a whole lot of value.
Yeah.
Yeah, because often those, you can identify, I think what you're also saying, Adrian, is that, there's one project or a set of 3 projects that could address a whole slew of vulnerabilities and exploits and activity and just wipe those off the table. But the real fundamental problems we can get to much more quickly if we say, you should really do this, and then you should do this, and then guess what? Those 20 attacks that I could spend 2 years identifying basically go away.
Yep. I think that's one of the things that, that we do well at InGuardians is that we'll, for example, on an external pen test or web application assessment, and we get to a point where there's some compromise involved. And the next call to the customer is, so we're in. How far do you want us to demonstrate that this is a risk to the business?
Right.
Do you want us to take this to full Active Directory compromise? Because we can. Where do you want us to stop figuring out where that risk lies for you? Or do you just want us to spitball?
So it's actually an interesting. Yeah. That's an interesting comment there, because I've had one client specifically tell me that they were so tired of every pen testing team coming in and going after Active Directory, because all their production stuff that they really care about is all Linux. They have all this Linux infrastructure, and even though these pen testers are coming in using Linux to attack things, or using Kali or some variant of some Linux-based pen testing OS. They're not attacking Linux. They're going after the low-hanging fruit, and they're like, yeah, we know Windows is an issue, and we know what the risk is of someone getting domain admin and grabbing this stuff over here. But what we're really worried about, and they're telling, at the beginning of the engagement, we want the goal to be Linux. Attack this stuff over here, and they come in and they're like, we got domain admin.
We don't care about that.
Come on, guys.
Yeah. You're
not doing this for you. You're doing this for us.
Right. And I think that, certainly in that example that I set, understanding what their risk is, how far do you want us to take that? And where's the ultimate goal at that point?
Right.
I think setting that example is better. Not, hey, we can take this all the way to domain compromise if Active Directory is where you think we need to be to get the keys to the kingdom, as it were.
Right.
So, you tell us where. You set some direction for the keys to the kingdom, because now it's turned from an external into an internal. Sure. And how far can we take it? How far do you want us to take it? How far do you want us to spitball as to theorize how far we could have taken it based on what we discovered?
Well, I think a good question to ask at that point is, at the point we're at, could you have stopped us here? You know?
Yeah.
Could you have stopped the compromise at this point? Do you have any controls or visibility in place to have stopped us at this point?
I might argue usually the answer is, wait, you're in?
Yeah.
Wait.
And that's and to me that says we shouldn't even be doing a pen test.
Finding number one. Finding number one.
Jason?
I had an engagement I worked recently, a couple of months ago, where they gave us, literally, they wanted to see, hey, you've got access to the environment. We want you to get access to these systems right here, these type of systems. We won't tell you where they're on the network. But they're segregated. We've got all kinds of stuff. Here's domain admin privileges. Try and get into it.
Oh.
Yeah.
I love that. I love
that. That's the assumed breach model, right?
Scenario of you've got this level of permissions. You pop the sysadmin, you manage to get domain admin, whatever it is. We don't care about that as much as we care about you getting access to payment card information.
Right.
So go.
So back in 2011, Haroon Mir keynoted 44Con in London, and he gave a talk called Penetration Testing Considered Harmful. And one of his suggestions that he made is give your pen testers some zero-day cards. You know, some basically, you know, just some made-up, like let's just assume you got this level of access, like what you were just describing, and let's see what kind of findings we get if you start from that. You know, because if we look at every breach, like they're all getting that far, and at that point, that's where everything falls apart, and that's why dwell time is a term. Which, you know, if we were doing things right, dwell time shouldn't even be a term in our industry.
Unfortunately,
you know,
that dwell time is really long.
So focused on preventative controls, you know, that we spent no time on detective controls. And once the attacker's in, once the pen tester's in, nobody sees them.
Yeah, so true. So true.
Yeah, I think it's something we need to get back to. And, you know, I know John Stratton and I were working on pen test together back when we merged pen testing companies. Some of the exercises we do is we'd have the company send us, and this was probably back around 2010, 2011, we'd send us a laptop, like pretend we're a new employee, send us a laptop, give us credentials, give us VPN access.
Your vetting was poor.
And then that's where the test started, right?
Yep.
And maybe it starts with your user account is a domain admin. Okay, now tell me what you can get access to. And I loved that kind of testing, and I think that in recent times we've kind of lost sight of that from the kind of sexy appeal of, well, I don't want the tester to know anything about my environment like a real attacker, and now go. But what you're doing is you're kind of spinning those and wasting those resources on stuff you already know about. And I think that's something we really need to get back to as an industry.
I want to drop a line here because the person that may be listening to this will know who it is, just because. And you talk about that whole you get the laptop with some credentials and maybe that user's a domain admin. But I will just say this: of the 312 user accounts in the domain, 225 of them were domain admins.
Wow! Like that, I mean,
could go
local
wrong?
admin is one thing, but domain admin?
That's all I am going to say about that.
Yeah. I mean, the customer could almost disclose that to you, and you don't even need to do a test, and you could write a whole report on recommendations for improved security.
That's pretty much what we did.
So one of the things I was throwing out there, kind of as a joke, but I would love to test it. I would love to test it, or for someone to test this theory, you know, take it and do it. Let the pen tester interview some key people for 10 or 15 minutes. And then have them write down what they think is going to be in the report. Then do the test and see how close the actual report is to what they thought after just talking to them for a few minutes.
That's really innovative, actually.
But they've got to be honest. They got to answer honestly when they're asking them these questions. Or maybe, ideally, I think you'd have two different people doing it because it would be cheating otherwise, right?
Sure. It's awesome. All right. With that, Adrian, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break, come back, and cover security news for this week. A lot of interesting news items that have been happening, so stay tuned.